Welcome everyone to our Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies lecture series. This is the second one of this year already, and we had one yesterday, and some of you were here, others couldn't make it. And yesterday someone came from, the Congress, the World Conservation Congress. He was flown over here to do the interpreting in Spanish. And it just so happened that Professor Tsuruta was also in town, and so we grabbed her and said, we know you're not feeling very well. She kind of lost her voice, and so we've been hoping the last few days it's getting a little better, but we do have a microphone for her. But Professor Tsuruta teaches at the Tokyo Foreign Language Studies University, Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, that's her proper name. And so I'm going to ask her to introduce a little bit about her background. But some of us, when we were watching, for example, Obama go to Tokyo recently or go to Japan recently, and like the Olympics, the closing ceremonies, well, if you were in Japan and you were watching on TV, you would hear her voice. So she had to interpret like right there, right then, and it's really hard, because you never know. And they may even speak in French, and she just goes from French to English as well. So we're going to have you introduce yourself. Let's all welcome Professor Tsuruta.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Okay, thank you for the very kind introduction. Sorry, my voice is still not the normal kind of voice I have, but I'm very glad that I can talk to you today about broadcast interpreting, more specifically news interpreting. And I also do some diplomatic or usual kind of conference interpreting, and I am teaching at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies, interpreting and communications course there. Okay, so a little bit about my background. I am a so-called Kikoku Shijo, or returnee student. My first half of elementary school I spent in Japan, and then my father, who was a banker, went to New York when I was in 4th grade. So half my education of elementary school is in United States. Then I went back after completing elementary school, and then actually I did skip a grade, so I was in junior high for just a little bit, but then going back to Japan, I had to go back again to elementary school because the school year does not start in September, it starts in April. But anyway, so my junior high I spent in Tokyo, but then for high school I went to American International School in New Delhi because that was where my father was posted on assignment there. So after completing that, I went back to Japan, and I majored in French, surprisingly. Well, I still do remember some of what I learned, but I think my teachers or the Jesuit fathers who taught me at University of Sevilla would not be very happy if I say I lost everything, but well, I still do retain some French, hopefully. And then I went to United States with my husband, who is in banking business. In fact, I met him while I was also working at Bank of Tokyo. Now it's merged, so the name is different. But anyway, so I worked in financial industry even after I got married, and I got my master's degree in business. I went to graduate school of business at Columbia University because my husband was, when we were newlyweds, were posted in New York. So actually my background is in finance, and I have my finance and marketing degree from graduate school of business at Columbia University. And so I'm an MBA, and I am also an AIC member, which James Nolan was also. AIC stands for Association Internationale d'Interprètes de Conférences. That's a French acronym with the headquarters in Geneva. But I am having a very interesting combination of being MBA and AIC member. And I also am a chartered financial analyst because I worked in financial industry, and I was actually an analyst at securities company for some time. And another thing that I should tell you about my background is I also lived in Milan, Italy for 6 years. that was where my husband took me when he was assigned a post in Milan at Bank of Tokyo. So I also speak Italian. And what happened was, well, what brought me to this is that after coming back to Italy, and I worked in Japan and United States and also in Italy as a financial analyst, and I worked for Nomura Italia actually. And then after coming back from Italy, I was looking for something to do. I had 2 very young children at that time, and I wanted to have something that I can combine my career and make good use of my foreign language abilities and make use of all the other things that I've gained over time. And in this kind of work, nothing is useless. I mean, everything comes in handy. In Japanese, there is a saying, "Gei wa mi o tasuku," or what you have gained would help you at some point in your time of your life. And I've had a considerably long experience of being a media interpreter, conference interpreter. I have more than 20 years experience. But before that, as I said, I had more than 10 years experience in the financial industry, and I also have a professional accreditation that I have gained on my way, MBA and also CFA, which I studied very hard to acquire, and has been useful to help me have a career in the first half of my life, so as to speak. But what happened was that NHK, the public broadcaster in Japan, decided that it would want to have so-called broadcast interpreters. It was 1990s. At that time, the word broadcast interpreter or hosotsuyak was not in existence even, but it started with this initiative that NHK as a public broadcaster wanted to have, so that it can bring, as the title shows here, bringing news to and from the world. So I'll explain a little bit about what that means in this article that I've written in 2011. And that was a year that I had a half-year sabbatical from my university, so I had some time to write and do research. So this is the article that I wrote for what is called Interpreters Newsletter that is published in Trieste. I can even show you where this comes from. And I was not sure whether my voice is working all right, so I did make some photocopies of an abridged version of what's called news interpreting. That what had brought me into this business, and also I think I'm probably one of the experts in this area. And this is a photocopy that I had asked Yumiko Sensei to make a photocopy and distribute to all of you. And this is in Encyclopedia of Interpreting Studies that's published by Routledge, by who is a very famous researcher, Franz Pojacker. And if you're interested in interpreting studies, this is the encyclopedia that you should take a look. And I just copied the part from my contribution, which is news interpreting. But if you're interested in this field, I think you should definitely look for a copy. I'm sure there must be a copy in University of Hawaii Library. So you should look up this media interpreting as well. Okay, so I'll give you an overview of what it is that is broadcast interpreting and what's the kind of job I do as a broadcast interpreter. NHK is actually my biggest employer. I also do work for CNN and other private TV companies once in a while. And then I would go into my recent experience and what I thought was very interesting experience, which you don't normally get being conference interpreter, but you do get when you are a broadcast or media interpreter in my latter part of the talk. Okay, so to get started, all right, so okay, so this just shows, so as it is, as I said, it's 5 years ago, so during past 25 years, interpreters have been active for some broadcast TV news in Japan. So, and one thing is very unique about broadcast interpreting is the TV news interpreting is short preparation time and undefined audience. In international conference setting, you can have a look at who your audience are, and you can maybe occasionally like, if you see a, familiar face in the audience, or if it gives a kind nod, I can say, okay, my communication is working. But in broadcast interpreting, you cannot see your audience. And, they're very, they might be, saying, well, if the interpreting is not good, they might turn off the channel, they might watch something else, so we don't have a captive audience like you do in a conference setting. And then the preparation time for international conference, you might have scripts in advance, or you might have briefing with the speaker beforehand, but in this kind of a setting, you don't usually have any kind of a briefing, because it's coming from miles away from the other parts of the world. It's not just English into Japanese, but NHK does broadcast other news channels. Okay, so let me just tell you about this. And as I was telling Patricia, so which countries actually do have this kind of a broadcast interpreting. I did go to Arte to do research, a European channel. So there, at that time that I went to do research in Arte, that's stationed in Strasbourg, they have a French channel and a German channel. So it's bilingual French and German, and they did use interpreters to broadcast the news in German into French and news in French into German at that time. But now I understand that is unfortunately discontinued. But okay, I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. But in South Korea also, I do understand that although it's not as regular TV programming as in Japan, this is what's very unique in Japan, is that it's regularly programmed TV programs are broadcast with broadcast interpreter's voice as the main channel. But in other countries, you do have special occasions like the Academy Awards ceremony or inaugural address by U.S. President. Well, I'm still waiting to see who would get elected. And also for the election night, I do have assignment already to broadcast that event, or events like the Brexit vote that James Donovan was also talking about. I did interpret for that event as well, and also for the Olympics. I talk a little bit about more about that. Okay, so in the last 50 years, there were several big events that prompted this kind of Hosotsuyaku broadcast interpreter into being, and the biggest one in Japan that kind of started this, to have the broadcast news in on TV, was this NASA's Apollo 11 on the moon in 1967. That was way back. But then in 1990, around 1990 is when Japan Public Broadcasting Corporation, or NHK, Nihon Hoso Kyokai, started this. And then this was test operated around 1988, and I joined after I came back from Italy in 1991. But big incident before I joined was 1989 in Beijing, and the first Gulf War in 1991. And then I've gone through this event, of course, the September 11, 2001. And I did document about the Iraq War in another article in 2003. But those big events, and everybody knows what happened in 2011, March 11. That was the time that news into English was also required of us broadcast interpreters. And this year, unfortunately, we had another big earthquake in Kumamoto. So that occasion also, I was called by NHK to interpret into news on NHK World, the NHK subsidiary for broadcast news from Japan to the world. And that time I was just guiding my friends who were on visit from Italy, and then I was touring a Japanese garden, and then all of a sudden my cell phone rings, and then I was told, oh, can you come as soon as you can to interpret about what's happening in Kumamoto? And well, I said, okay, well, after I am through with this, and I did go for my shift, because on those occasions there are very much shortage of people who can do it on spot like that. Okay, all right, so I'll give you an overview of what's being done now. This is what's happening. So what's called prepared interpretation. We do have some preparation time, not all that much, but we do have some time after we do listen to the news, and then we can prepare some kind of a draft, not a full script, but that is transmitted live. Let's say that the news is conveyed at 4 a.m. 4 a.m. in the morning, and then we might go on the air at 6 a.m., maybe 2 hours preparation time. It depends on which language. For English interpreters, we usually have more experience than other languages, so preparation time tends to be shorter. But okay, I show you what kind of broadcasts we do have. NHK broadcast by satellite, world wave. But then the other big employer is CNN Japan. J stands for Japan, CNN-J, and then BBC World. They do have broadcasts over 10 hours per day. But then what is this, and just for 30 minutes is we have CBS News on TBS, and we have Squawk on the Street, that is economic news program on Nikkei CNBC. Okay, all right. So the mode of prepared interpreting, you can read about that if you're interested. And I don't know what happened here, but there has been some mix-up. But these are the broadcast channels. So from the United States, we have ABC, Bloomberg, CNN, PBS, and Brazil, TV Bandeirantes. In Europe, we have BBC, of course, and France 2. Germany, ZDF, and somehow Vietnam ended up there, but these are all the channels from Asia. Thailand, Singapore, Turkey, India, and all those, and Australia also. Okay, so news rush hour is actually early morning. We have all kinds of languages at NHK. So there is what's called a section called Door to the World, and the news is picked up from all the channels by the newscaster who is there to broadcast the news, and not entire programs of, for example, Thai or Vietnam, but those are the pickups that the broadcaster would decide to choose. Okay, and I just go a little bit into detail about what we have to be very careful about is the role expected of the interpreter is to convey to the Japanese TV viewers in an intelligible way the latest news conveyed in France or whatever. And two things there we have to keep in mind. One is to consider human rights and refrain from showing minors with handcuffs or dead bodies lying in the field. Sometimes it can be very problematic because, for example, broadcasters like BBC do occasionally have really very, very, graphic, yes, graphic is the word, graphic dead bodies lying in the field, and that NHK does not show as a policy. And we do need to address criminals with honorifics. So Japanese media customarily says yogisha, or meaning suspect, after the suspect names. We don't just, hear it without any kind of honorific. And we usually say plaintiff, hikoku, added after the name. And other consideration is that, the royalties that a TV station might demand later. So if the TV station is using materials other than that shot from the original TV station, we'd tell the news desk that we cannot use this because the material is from another station, and if you decide to use that, you would have to pay a very high royalty. So we weed out for things like that. That's the advantage of prepared news interpreting. So we can drop those parts that are not convenient. And another thing is we also take very care of Japanese TV, the NHK, because that's a public broadcaster. So we do not say the product name, such as Barbie or McDonald's. We just say a hamburger or a doll or something like that, because we don't want to be advertising the names. So that kind of a caution we have to take. Okay, so that's the overview of how it is into Japanese, and I tell you a little bit about Japanese news into English. So those are the two programs that's regularly broadcast in Japan with news into English by simultaneous interpreters, what's called News 7, 7 o'clock news, and News Watch 9, 9 o'clock news. Okay, so here we do have what's called news writers, and then we do have what's called readers and for prepared news. So those are read out by what's called readers and prepared by what's called news writers before going on the air. But for the part that suddenly happens, like some kind of an incident that struck on the day, or some kind of an interview that has to be made at the last minute, that part is conveyed by simultaneous interpreters. Okay, and I just tell you a little bit about what happened on March 11. And so that was a very big operation that required huge amount of resource. So as I described here, from March 11, 2011, 382 people worked for the 45 days that required simultaneous interpreting for NHK General Stars for Sogo, or the Channel 1, and NHK World, that's the international channel of NHK. Okay, so, well, I talked about the constraints that, since it's journalism, that we have to be careful. So sorry, my today's voice doesn't qualify for this, but we need to have pleasant, lively voice, regular rhythm, good diction, and interpreter's capacity to take on the journalistic role, okay? And if you're interested, you can read a lot about broadcast interpreting from this researcher, Straniero Sergio. Unfortunately, he deceased at a very young age, but well, he's very much a professional in this area, TV journalism. And okay, so 3 key requirements necessary to become broadcaster. Language ability, of course, and then background knowledge of international news and presentation skills. Background knowledge is very, very important. So I always follow the news wherever I go and whenever I can. So you have to have knowledge about what's happening in the world, and if a very big event, like a big earthquake or a news event, well, so some of the things you can plan ahead, like U.S. presidential election, you know already that it's going to happen on November 8th, so that you can plan ahead. And also for Olympics closing ceremony, yes, you can plan ahead, but for instance, Kumamoto earthquake, nobody can plan for that. Okay, and all right, so okay, so there are some other considerations, and then a training. You might be a bit interested in how you can get such kind of a job. All right, as for now, it is becoming more and more difficult. NHK has a school that's called NHK International Training Institute that started in 1992. I just got in at the last minute. That was when you were able to get in with passing an exam. But now you have to be a graduate of this training institute if you really want to become your career in broadcast interpreter at NHK. Okay, so the language ability, background knowledge, and presentation skills are all addressed in this training. And I'm really, let's say, first generation of broadcast interpreters, and there are people like me who started out in conference interpreting, then came to broadcast interpreting, and we have more than 20 years experience here. And the first graduates have more than, yes, since the school opened in 1992, yeah, they have more than 20 years experience even. Okay, so all right, I talk about the challenges there, and then I have the background information if you want to. Okay, so if you want to have this article, that's where it is. So it comes from Trieste, University of Trieste, and you just look for University of Trieste. That's Italian University Trieste, but you can just look for this Interpreters Newsletter 16, and that is the article that I have coded. Okay, I show you two more articles that I had done, and one is Exploring Media Interpreting. This is the interview I have with Vincent Buck, who is a broadcast interpreter himself and who worked for Arte. And we talk about what are the qualities of a broadcast interpreter that's necessary, and he also talks about pleasant voice, having a background knowledge, always following news, and to be able to have a journalistic understanding, not just working on live news program differs from straight conference interpreting. And well, this is major factor is timing and synchronization. In broadcast interpreting, you have to stay with the image. I mean, you have to finish. When the news is showing a certain image, you have to finish on the spot. You cannot lag behind. And synchronization is quite important. And that's, I think, one of the constraints of news interpreting. And you have to be there with the script, with the image. And okay, and another thing is that Vincent Buck stresses is that you have to be able to use your voice. And sometimes there are more than one speaker in the news. For example, if there's an interview about how do you feel after an earthquake well, unfortunately, Italy had a very big earthquake, and there might be an interview about that to an ordinary citizen. And one of the challenges is that you have to work through all kinds of varieties of English. So sometimes, well, if the Italian citizen is speaking, that is already translated by Italian into English. Well, I happen to understand Italian as well, but that the English quality might be, all kinds of different varieties. And especially if an ordinary citizen is talking, you sometimes you can't even understand, well, is it really English, So those are the challenges, I think. Okay, that's one article that I wanted to tell you about. And okay, this is an article I wrote in Ike Newsletter. And this is a webzine, so you can look it up. And I really like my job as a media interpreting. So I'm often asked the question, the work is intense, demand is great, the schedule is sometimes very exhausting, and why do you keep doing this job? And my answer is that, it's just the thrill of being there when the history is being made. Okay, so I've gone through so many things during this job, and well, in CNN newsroom, I've gone through lots of U.S. elections and inaugural addresses, and I've gone through Mount Etna eruption, the Costa Concordia event. Oh, this is a bit old because this is also written in 2011, and I literally cried. Well, yesterday James Snowden was saying that sometimes he really was very emotionally, he got very emotional in the booth as well, but I share that feeling. I cried when CNN Heroes drama was reported there, and witnessed how great human beings can be and how humble the truly great are, So anyway, okay, it really brings back so many memories. So I would summarize the passion for my job as being, being there with what's happening in the world. Okay. Okay, so that is, I think, enough information. All right. So when I was asked to talk to you, I was asked about the diplomatic events, because I say I did tell Sue that I interpreted for President Obama's Hiroshima speech. So I was asked that maybe I can talk about those high-level diplomatic events or the specialized TV events. And those do command a lot of attention, but this is what's called the special televised events. So this is aside from the regular TV news programs that I get as an assignment. But that Hiroshima speech was very special because what happened was all the private TV news networks wanted to hire interpreters, so we were in great demand. All of a sudden, we have channel 4, 6, 8, 10, and well, what used to be 12, TV Tokyo is now channel 7. So NHK, of course, and CNN, plus the 5 private networks all wanted to hire interpreters to broadcast live the event from Hiroshima. But one very interesting fact that I have to underline is I never went out of Tokyo. I was always in the TV station. You know, I don't have to travel to Hiroshima. And James Nolan actually was making a point that a media interpreter might be the job of the future, and he was telling me how lucky I am to get this job because, you know, you don't have to be outside of the city. I mean, the technology is all there. It is, you know, hooked to the TV station, or the images and the sound would come to the TV station's interpreting booth. So we never need to go outside Tokyo to do this job. Actually, in Japan, all the broadcast interpreters are in Tokyo, not in any other cities. So all the news is actually broadcast from Tokyo, actually. All right, so, okay, and then providing interpreting in diplomatic events for President Obama's Hiroshima talk. So what happened was this is an optimum opportunity if you're interested in research to compare the different varieties of the simultaneous interpreting. You don't get that very often. The first chance I had of that was President Obama's first inaugural address. All the different TV stations wanted to bring that live. So that was the first opportunity. As a researcher, I'm always very interested in how the other simultaneous interpreters handle this very difficult, demanding, and challenging, because it's live, and we did get script for the inaugural address. It came in like 20 minutes before that president went on air. It was embargoed until delivery, and then we did have a bit of a chance to look through that, but that's it. And for Hiroshima speech, it was all very secret. We did not have any idea of what he's going to say, or even how long he is going to speak. So unfortunately, some TV stations just hired one interpreter. It ended up to be 17 minutes. So some of my poor colleagues did everything, you know, by themselves. So 17 minutes is very tough without a script to do alone. But luckily, I had a partner.